Welcome everyone to the School of the Wisdom of a Theosophical Society, ADIA. My name is Juliet Bates and I'm part of the team of the school, and I will be your host today with Maria Atama. Our facilitator today is Vic Hauchin. The School of the Wisdom program for 2022 continues today with a course for members and non-members, as it is an introduction course. So welcome to the fifth session of an introduction to the Ageless Wisdom facilitated by Vic Hauchin. You can also register for the upcoming courses. In October, we have the Fundamentals of Advaita Vedanta, a lead-in to Vedanta Cycle 1, facilitated by Dr. Radha Raghunathan. And it's necessary for you to do this course if you would also like to register for the second course in September, the Fundamentals of Advaita Vedanta, Tattva Bodha Cycle 1, also facilitated by Dr. Radha Raghunathan. In October, the school offers From Intellectual Understanding to Life Practice, Foundations of the Buddha's Teaching in the Light of Theosophy, facilitated by Tran Thi Kim Dieu. And from November to December, we have Sanskrit, the Divine Language, facilitated by Dr. Sadananda Das. However, in January, the Necessary Journey of Self-Transformation, facilitated by the Emeritus Professor Ravi Ravindra, will be held in presence at the Blavatsky Bungalow in Adia. You can find all full details of times, etc., of our English program for 2022 on the SOW website, along with the program in Spanish. So don't miss out and register for your place on our website. The way today's meeting will be conducted is that your microphones will be muted. You will not be able to unmute yourselves until we open them again for question and answers. If you would like to ask a question, you can either write it in the chat or use the raise hand icon. If you do need to leave the session early, please do not announce it on the chat so as not to disturb the proceedings. And try to keep your questions brief so that there is time for everyone to participate. The School of the Wisdom is an important activity at ADIA, as well as all of the work done by the Theosophical Society as a whole, because it seeks to expand the level of consciousness of all participants. So please embrace this spirit and refrain from asking political questions or related comments. The exercise of compassion begins by thinking of others. You will receive the links to the classes, as you have already done for the first 2 weeks, directly to your email address, and any material Vic Hauchin may wish to share will also be sent to you all by an email from the school. Participants attending at least 80% of the classes will receive a beautiful certificate of participation designed by Portuguese artist Joma Sipe. Therefore, if you do have to miss any classes for reasons beyond your control, please send us an email to make us aware of your situation and to register your absence. Thank you again for listening. Welcome everyone to an introduction to the Ageless Wisdom. And there will be a 10-minute break midway. It is now my honor to pass the word to Vic Hauchin for today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Good afternoon to all of you, or good evening, or good morning. Today's our fifth session, and last time we covered reincarnation, and the logical sequel to this topic is on karma, the law that governs this process of growth as well as reincarnation. So I'll share with you my screen. And the subject is about karma and human destiny. The subject of karma is actually one of the easiest topics, but also one of the hardest topics among all the subjects in theosophy. Easy because it is something that's very well known to us. You start doing something, it will have an effect. You create a repeated behavior, you develop a habit. You say something to somebody, the person will be happy or will become angry. And then when the person becomes angry, then the person now will think of something against you. And so we all call this the karmic results of our actions, our behavior, our thoughts, our feelings. And hence, it is something very familiar to us already, not only in terms of our daily life, but also in science, the law of motion, the law of cause and effect. However, it is also difficult because when you now look at life, you'll see the stupendous complexity of human life, of the universe, and how the consequences and the results are brought about not only in physical world. When you have a lot of balls and then you move one and it hits others, you will see the effects on the other balls, like in a billiard table. But when it comes now to human life, you have thoughts, probably hundreds of people in your life, and then you have done good and bad things to other people. You have been born many times. How do all these come to a particular situation in this life? That one is very complex, that even Madame Blavatsky says she would not be in a position to explain. So let's look into it, and keeping in mind that our understanding of karma must lead to an understanding of human destiny. We are only theoretically interested about the destiny of the universe, but we are sometimes desperately interested in our own destiny, or the destiny of people whom we love. At the beginning of our session, we asked certain basic questions like, why are there people born to poverty, while there are some people who are born to comfort and opportunity? This kind of imbalance is already so prejudicial against certain types of people and so advantageous to other people. Why are some people born healthy and normal, while others are born with lifetime disabilities that prevent them from doing the things that they would like to do? This alone, which is beyond the control of both the parents and the children, would create already a very apparently grave injustice in human life. And we begin to wonder, why is this universe ruled this way? If God is in charge of this, isn't God unjust? Why are some people seem to be fortunate and happier? They meet the right people, they have better circumstances, but other people seem to be so unfortunate and unhappy. They become victims of injustices, they become victims of cruelty, bullying, crime, and so on, while others are generally free from them. Again, we'll find that there seems to be a very wide gap in the destiny of people and the circumstances of the lives of people. Now, in all of these questions, the answer is karma. Karma is a key factor. The reincarnation process is but a process, but it's karma which now determines what kind of a life we will live. And by understanding the dynamics of karma, we begin to understand what brought about the life that we have right now. We avoid tragedies, conflicts, and misfortunes in the future, whether in this life or in future lives. We can design and attain the kind of life that we like. Of course, this cannot be done in one day, 1 year, or even one life. But by understanding the dynamics, we now have more awareness about the causes, and then we can now determine the effects. In a previous session, we spoke about the higher and lower self, our inner nature, and that this affects the circumstances of our life. And hence we find that in our destiny, this inner self, this internal nature of ours, and then there's an external one, which is about the effects. This internal one is the cause, whereas the external circumstances would be the effect. And hence, in the study of karma, we are brought to the importance of what is happening inside of us, because this would determine what is outside of us. Of course, the outside world will in turn influence our internal, but this is only so far as the lower triangle is concerned, because on the upper, the external circumstances will not substantially or essentially affect or change our perception of the higher perceptions and the higher triangle. So the nature of our internal life, whether lower or higher, becomes an important aspect in the way that we deal with karma, in the way that we design our destiny, and the way that we try now to determine what kind of causes will we generate for the future. Now, the law of karma has three facets. The first is the law as a general law of cause and effect. The second is the law, it is a law of retribution. And the third is that it is a law of equilibrium. Let's start with the law of cause and effect. This is something which we know in the physical world, in the world of science. When you create the same cause, you will have the same effect. It is a universal law that happens in the physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual places, such as the laws of motion. Then we know that our actions set off outer forces that would create a ripple effect on other things. Our emotional reactions trigger our actions. The internal emotions would trigger physical actions and set off corresponding reactions in other people. Our mind and spiritual state determine how we will respond to the situation or environment, and thus will determine the nature of our external action that will create a new round of karma. The law of equilibrium. This is the law that brings anything from a state of imbalance to a state of equilibrium and harmony. In the Key to Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky wrote, "The universe and everything in it, moral, mental, physical, psychic, or spiritual, is built on a perfect law of equilibrium and harmony. Karma does act so as to restore harmony and preserve the balance of equilibrium. The only decree of karma, an eternal and immutable decree, is absolute harmony in the world of matter as it is in the world of spirit." In manifestation, we find that the play of energy or forces in the world would tend to, there are factors which would tend to create motion, activity, and so on. But those activities eventually veer towards eventual balance and equilibrium. And whenever it is still in a state of balance, then action will keep on going on, but in the end, it will settle down into equilibrium. One example that we can use as a model of it would be when we drop a pebble into water, into a pond, and we'll find that this pebble will create ripples of waves around the water. It will keep on going there, but eventually these waves, these ripples, will begin to fade away until it goes back to a state of balance. The third aspect is the law of retribution. Now, this law of retribution is a subset or part of the law of cause and effect and the law of equilibrium, but this one applies to sentient beings, especially those with self-consciousness. Because a stone or rain or rivers or volcanoes, they create causes and then they go to equilibrium. In the case of sentient beings, something new is added. It is a center of consciousness, a sense of ego. And then this center has its own individual cause that will produce effects on itself. This sense of self, like me, I, as Vic, would think about something and would start causes. And the forces would trigger, then travel back to its source to attain equilibrium. In other words, we are two human beings, you and me, and when I say something, let's say I say something very hurting to you, what you hear is my voice, the sound. It reaches your ears, and then it creates an impact on you emotionally, and then you feel hurt, and you're angry with me. You are not angry with the sound that brought the words into your ears. It is not. You're angry with the center of self that caused that sound and those words which were said. And therefore, this particular self, this center, becomes a particular cause that must now be the object of equilibrium in the future. So this kind of karma is different from the karma of impersonal with inanimate objects. And hence, this law of retribution applies to this particular group of beings. And this is what we call individual karma. Stones and natural bodies, they don't have individual karma. They just are involved in a karmic cause and effect, but not individualized. In the Mahatma letters, one of the Mahatmas said that the law of retribution is the only law that never errs. Now, when there are sentient beings, then the process is a bit different from ordinary things. In the Mahatma letters, the Mahatma wrote, as soon as any conscious or sentient being, whether man, deva, or animal, dies, a new being is produced, and he or it reappears in another birth under conditions of his or its own antecedent making, which is karmic causes started before, and it will appear in another birth, and the conditions are due to what it has done before. In other words, the previous sentient being will now create causes on the subsequent sentient being in another life. And take note that the Mahatma speaks not only of human beings, but also of devas or animals. And therefore, animals do have this kind of karma. Karma is the guiding power, and Trishna, or thirst, or desire to sentiently live, it is the proximate force or energy, the resultant of human or animal action, which out of the old skandhas, in other words, the factors that cause karma, produces the new group that form the new being and control the nature of the birth itself. In other words, this old sanskaras, these seeds of karma, will now form the new group that form the new being and control the nature of the birth and the life of that entity. This new being is now rewarded or punished for the meritorious acts and misdeeds of the old one. So this kind of retributive aspect of karma applies only to sentient being, but not to stone and other things. when a stone falls and then hits another stone, that other stone will not get back at this first stone. Now, there are two facets, therefore, in karma. The first aspect of karma is karma in general, and this is the general law of cause and effect applicable to all manifested beings, whether human or not. It is impersonal. It is amoral, meaning it has no moral at all. Nothing good or evil, nothing good or bad. The second aspect of karma is personal karma, and this refers to karmic links caused by a particular ego or sentient being that falls under retributive karma. The processes involved in karma involves the three kinds. Karma, this now refers to sentient beings. The first would be the unripe karma. These seeds of karma are not yet ripe for this life, and they are part of what is called the accumulated karma or sanchita karma. For example, I owe a debt to Mr. A. But if Mr. A is not born at the same time as I am, then I cannot repay back this debt. I have to wait until I'm born together with Mr. A in some future life before this karma can be completed. So it becomes unripe, it is something pending and floating and will not take effect yet in this life. So we have so many unripe karmas in our existence. Then the second one is the ripe karma. These are the things which are already ripe for this life and which will happen in this life. So for example, when we are born to our parents, that's ripe karma. And if our relationship with our parents or our siblings are positive or negative, then these relationships from the past will work themselves out in this life. And so we'll have to deal with it in this life. If, for example, the conditions in this life is ripe for correcting the injustices that I have done in the past, then maybe in this life, I will become myself a victim of injustice. So these are the ripe karmas that we are now facing in this life. Then the third type of karma is what is called the present karma or agami karma. These are the new causes that we generate at each moment. This is different from ripe karma because this present karma is something that is not yet there yet a moment ago. Right now I'm speaking, I'm generating new karma right now. If what I'm saying is something that will harm you, then I'm generating new karma that will come back to me eventually. If I'm saying something that will be helpful, then that will also generate new causes and effects in the future. And of all the three karmas, this one is the most important, the present karma. We are often concerned about the ripe karma that we are facing, the good things that happen, and then the unfortunate things that happen, and we blame the world, we blame fate, we blame God about the ripe karma that we are facing. But when we begin to understand the dynamics of karma, we find that the ripe karma is something which will just come inevitably because we have caused them before. We can no longer undo what we have done last life, which will bring about the ripe karma for this life. That's done. It will just happen. But there is something else which we can introduce in order to modify how the ripe karma will happen in our lives. And this is the present karma. For example, suppose I did something very harmful to you. And in a past life, you develop extreme hatred towards me. And now we are born together in this life. Maybe as co-workers, maybe as husband and wife, maybe as siblings. And it will become hate at first sight. When you see me in this life, you don't know me because we have now new personalities, but somehow you feel a strong sense of enmity in this life. And suppose I'm now becoming the victim of your hatred. Now, what I do in this life will now modify the accumulated effect of the right karma. For example, if despite the fact that you are treating me very negatively, I continue to do good things towards you. So the hatred you have with me is now being modified because I'm adding new karma, new right karma into the equation. In other words, every time I do something good to you, that hatred, that enmity will now be mixed with something positive, and it will become less and less. I cannot change the past karma, but I can modify the accumulated karma of the right karma. And this is done by our present karma. And therefore, the most important insight in the knowledge of karma is our control over our present karma, which is the internal element in our life that can create new karma that will make a difference. So in all our discussion, it is our present karma which will make a difference. The right karma we only try to understand, but we can't do anything about it anymore. Now, in the right karma, there are three kinds. The first one is the things that are easy to change. These are habits during childhood that you can change when you grow up, depending on how your parents bring us up, how our teachers teach us, how people around us would influence us. And these are things that are easy to change. There are those which are difficult to change. For example, genetic tendencies. I may have genetic tendency towards whatever heart problem, diabetes, or karmic hatred. If I'm not aware of this, it's very, very difficult to change. Maybe I won't be able to change it. But if I develop a mature level of self-awareness, then even if they're difficult, I may be able to change this. For example, if I have a genetic tendency towards diabetes, I can change my lifestyle. And then my brothers and sisters may all have diabetes or heart problems, but maybe I will not. In other words, I've been able to change something which is quite difficult. Then the third one are things which cannot be changed. For example, my place of birth, I cannot change that anymore. My parents, I cannot change that. I can leave them, but they are my biological parents. Sometimes the time of death cannot be changed, but sometimes it can, depending on factors. And there are things which we may call fated events. The example that comes to my mind is the assassination of John Kennedy. If you read about the assassination of John Kennedy, which happened in 1963, there were factors which apparently could have been prevented, but was not prevented. Now, let me just mention something about this case. In the United States, since the 1860s, every president that is elected every 20 years, they die in office. 1860, 1880, 1900, 1920, 1940. 1940 was Roosevelt. Roosevelt died in office. All of them died in office. And so this became so well known because no president dies in office every 20 during this 20-year period. Okay, try to mute yourself. Thank you. Now, this became very well known. And Kennedy knew about this, President Kennedy, and then he said, I'll break this jinx. Now, he was elected in 1960, and then one time he was going to southern part of the United States in order to help in the election. And there was one psychic, her name is Jean Dixon, who somehow foresaw that Kennedy will be assassinated in that part in the south of the United States if he goes there. So she attempted to get in touch with the White House. She tried to get contact people to tell the president not to go to the southern part of the United States because he will be assassinated. And then my understanding is that Kennedy got this message, but he still said, no, I'll break this jinx. He did not believe in it. And so here were attempts already to prevent this from happening, and yet he still went to Texas, and there he was assassinated. Is this an example of something which seemingly preventable but actually cannot be? Perhaps. So many years ago, I studied about certain things, things that people predicted about the death of people, like kings, for example. And these kinds of predictions seem to have followed the fate of the person follows the prediction, even if the person was already told and became aware of it. So these probably are cases in which they are fated events. Now, what are the causes of destiny? Let's now go into this analysis, because by being aware of this, we are now in a better position to modify our own destiny. First, the right karma of the past, which comes to us as sanskaras or seeds of karma, they are the ones that bring about our life circumstances, the events in our lives, the relationships, even our character and habits. These come from our past. Whether we are interested in science, whether we like our parents or not, whether we like our siblings or not, these are due to past karma. Then, as we say, there is also the present karma or the present action. Modify our circumstances, events, relationships, character, and habits. And these will now determine our destiny, what will eventually happen. There is such a thing as destiny, but it is not something which is fixed. Part of it is fixed, like how tall I am. I cannot become a basketball player because I don't have necessary height to become an outstanding basketball player. So there are things which are fixed, but there are a lot of things which are not fixed. And to the extent that we become aware of these factors and deliberately change them, then we can alter in a major way our own destiny. So the nature of the present action becomes important. And if our present action is determined by our conditioned habits, then it just perpetuates the same direction of the destiny. So for example, my past karma developed in me a very lazy personality. Now, can I change it? I can, but if I grow up mainly affected by my conditioned habits, in other words, my parents did not teach me how to be more action-oriented, proactive, more industrious, have more initiative. So I continue to develop this lazy habit. And this will just continue my past sanskara or my past karma about being passive about things, and it will lead me to the same destiny. So we have a lot of conditioned habits in our lives that when we are not aware of them, they control our lives. On the other hand, there is another part in our lives, which is when we are exposed to a wise philosophy of life, when we become self-aware, then we become aware of our situation, and then these insights can change the direction of our destiny. So for example, suppose I'm very lazy, and I realize that if I continue with my laziness, I cannot reach something which is important to me. For example, maybe I'd like to become a very good musician. I'd like to be a very accomplished scientist, or I'd like to be a happy person. When I now become conscious of the conflict between my conditioned habits and these ideals I have, then I have to make a decision whether I'm going to overcome these conditioned habits or these conditioned habits will control my life. And this is now the tug of war between the higher and the lower, which we discussed in our previous sessions. When there is no such awareness, then the person will just continue doing what past karma has brought about to that person. Human beings who are born in a state of what is called idiocy, meaning lack of self-awareness. It is just the circumstances, the physical habits just continues and there is no self-awareness, then the past karma will continue and be perpetuated in this present life. These two factors are found in the lower and higher part of our consciousness. The conditioned habits are on the lower three, and the wise philosophy and self-awareness is on the higher three. And we have previously said that this lower part, the conditioning, is usually subconscious. And then when they're very strong, a person may find it's very difficult to change this. But when the higher becomes trained and become more developed, then it is possible to overcome these. So we need also to be aware about the cause and effect between what we do and what will be the resultant action. When we become conscious of this, then we are careful about choosing the cause that we generate in this present life. For example, when we do benevolent deeds, deeds that are kind, deeds that are helpful, then it leads to good environment. What would be good environment? The people around us would be helpful to us in turn. You know, there are some young people who are born to very poor families, and they assume that they will not be able to get good education or even go to college. And if there are, let's say, 5 or 7 siblings, the children grow up under such condition that they don't have the opportunity to go to school, and they just perpetuate the poverty that they have. But there may be one of them out of, let's say, 5 or 7 siblings that somehow encounters a situation where they are helped either by scholarship, by a person who offers such a scholarship, and then that person will now have this fortunate environment. And why the difference between that person and the other 6 siblings? It is because this particular person has developed benevolent deeds in one's past life, and so among the 7 siblings, he or she is the only one that benefited from this past benevolent deed. So conversely, hurtful deeds that harmed other people will produce difficult environment. So whenever we do loving and kind acts, it will create harmonious and positive relationship with people we encounter in this life. Whereas when we do unkind and unjust acts, it will create conflicting relationships that may bring about even an injustice into our life. Injustice in this present life because we don't see the causes, but it's not really injustice because we have created those causes in a past life. When we have dreams, aspirations, and we keep on thinking about them, we create ideals and capacities. When we admire a person, maybe a teacher, a scientist, an engineer, we develop ideals, and those ideals will create in turn desires, and then those desires will create capacities. So from life to life, we develop our faculties and capabilities because of these thoughts. Whenever we have sustained thoughts, we develop our character and our personality. And therefore, the quality of thoughts that we keep on injecting every day in our lives will make a difference in the development of our destiny. So the books that we read, the conversations that we have, the friends that we cultivate in this life, this will create sustained thoughts, and then this will eventually create character. And then whenever we do selfless acts, selfless service, without thinking about our own self-interest, then we develop spirituality. So these are examples of the cause and effect factors that if we become familiar with them, then we try to ensure that we don't do hurtful deeds anymore, because it will create difficult environments or problems in our relationships, not only next life, it may happen tomorrow or next week or next year or 10 years from now. So in a way, the laws, the guiding principles in karma is rather simple. Do benevolent deeds, loving and kind acts, and avoid hurtful deeds or unkind acts, because this will bring about the kind of life that we want or we don't want in the future. In trying to expand causes that will create karmic results, Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine wrote that it is a law of occult dynamics that a given amount of energy expended on the spiritual or astral plane is productive of far greater results than the same amount expended on the physical objective plane of existence. So for example, when there is an action taken, these usually are effects. For example, I accidentally broke a glass, then it's broken. That's the effect already, and that's because of a particular action. But now, when I do certain things with intention, like words or acts coming from my mind, my feelings, it will produce various kinds of effects. For example, kind words will produce favorable effects. If I say one kind word, it may produce many kinds of effects on the people who hear them. Maybe 4 people, 10 people. And the effect may be not only today, but also tomorrow and next week. So words and actions that cause effect will create multiple effects for even just word and action. Now, when we have emotions, likes, dislikes, this will create actions and words that will create effects. And so it will cascade down to more and more effects, because emotions precede actions or words. Then, if I have a thought pattern, a thought reaction, a quality of thinking, it will create my emotional reactions and habits, and then it will lead to physical actions and words, and it will result in maybe 100 effects in my life. So when we change our mind, when we change our thought patterns, it changes greater things, because it will affect our emotions, our words and actions, and multiple effects. Now, if we now change our philosophy of life, our way of life, develop in personality, spirituality, this philosophy of life, this way of life, will now create a ripple effect, not only on our actions, but even on our thoughts. And hence, these things, that the higher we go on the levels of consciousness, the greater change we do on the higher level, the greater is the effect in our life and in the outer world. Now take note that whenever there are effects, it will also bounce back to our emotional and thought patterns. And this is the reason the most important factor of change is when we go and transcend, we go into the higher triangle, which is not affected by external things because it is based on insight from within. For example, the insulting words of another person will not affect my insight that I should be fair to people. In other words, when there is that insight already, even if I'm insulted, even if I'm hurt, it will not affect my perception of fairness or truthfulness or kindness, which belong to the higher principle, that higher triangle where impersonality prevails. And these things are affected by our capacity for awareness. When we are not aware, these patterns and habits of thought and emotions will perpetuate itself. And this is the reason why it is very important for us to go into the practice of self-awareness and meditation, including willingness to receive feedback, because this will change even the lower levels of our consciousness. Then, in understanding karma, we must also realize that there is such a thing as group karma. For example, family karma. The family of Marcos or the family of Bush or our own families, we share a certain karma in our life. For example, if my father has helped a lot of people, then I will benefit from the karma created by my father to our family. And so there are other people who will be very kind and good to me simply because of my father. So we benefit from this group karma as a family. Then there is also the group karma of organization or groups. For example, if I'm a Catholic, I will reap the group karma of a Catholic. If I'm a Muslim, if I'm a member of the mafia, then I will have to reap the group karma of this group. For example, after the 9/11 thing, people who were perceived as Arabs in the United States, even if they were not Arabs, but they looked Arab, then they became also victims of this group karma because of their appearance, because of their race, even though they were not responsible at all for 9/11. So this would become like racial karma, national or racial karma, where people belong to certain races, they would share the same fate or similar, they will affect each other because of this group karma. Then we have the global karma. For example, if I emit carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere, it's not just going to affect Filipinos or people in Metro Manila. It may affect people outside of the Philippines and parts of the world. When the Philippines had experienced the eruption of Mount Pinatubo, this affected the climate of the whole world, not just in the Philippines. When there is a world war, then it affects many, many countries around the world. And so we share in this karma, depending on the type of karma that we have generated. So Blavatsky says, the one life is closely related to the one law which governs the world of being, which is karma. Exoterically, this is simply and literally action, or rather an effect producing cause. Esoterically, it is quite a different thing. In its far-flung moral effects, it is the unerring law of retribution, but now affecting the one life, not just my life or my family life, but the whole world. Since the ancient times, this concept of karma has been known. Among the Greeks, it is called nemesis and fate. In Christianity, it is called providence. minus the concept of design. In Islam, it's called kismet. In the Kabbalah, it's called tikkun. In Buddhism, it is called karma or kama. Now, how is karma recorded? This is the difficult part to understand because it is so complex. You have heard about what is called Akashic record, but in which all actions are supposed to be recorded. But how are these actions recorded and then brought into one life? This is the complex part. And the secret doctrine speaks about certain beings, not human beings, but certain beings, divine beings, called the Lipika. And these divine beings, she says, are connected with karma, the law of retribution, for they are the recorders or analysts who impress on the invisible tablets of the astral life, this is the Akashic record, the great picture gallery of eternity, a faithful record of every act and even thought of man, of all that was or ever will be in the phenomenal universe. In Hinduism, this is called Chitragupta. In Christianity, they are called the recording angels. And in Islam, they are referred to as the Kiraman Katibin, or the honorable scribes, the recording angels, or Rakib and Atid. Christianity has a lot of things mentioned in the Old and New Testament regarding this law of karma. In Galatians, St. Paul says, one reaps what one sows. Live by the sword and die by the sword. What measure you meet, it shall be measured unto you. And you have plowed with wickedness, you have reaped iniquity. Now, is it possible to act without generating new karma? Whenever our actions are generating, comes from our personality, our personal ego, our personal self-interest, with personal motives, then this creates personal karma, and it will come back to us as a person, either positively or negatively. However, when we have learned how to become aware of the principles above our personality, we go into our impersonal nature, like our higher mental and our intuitional or spiritual nature. Then we generate action without personal motives, because they are based on dharma, duty, or impersonal reason. And here, there is no personal karma. So, for example, a judge of the court, who tries to carry things out simply because it is a law, and he may dislike giving such a judgment personally, but still he would do it because it is his duty. Then that one becomes impersonal and becomes karmaless. His personal reaction to it will produce karma, but his action based on this impersonal principle will not generate karma. So in the spiritual life, it's the same thing. Whenever we now awaken our higher levels of consciousness, our spiritual and intuitional nature, then we begin a quality of life where our actions will become karmaless. This we will try to look into later when we look into the spiritual life. Now, a question is often asked during discussions of karma. Should we interfere with the karma of other people? So, for example, a person should deserve going to jail. So, shouldn't we leave them to go to jail rather than interfere with them because we are interfering with karma? Now, the simple answer is that we should interfere when it is our dharma or duty. For example, whenever parents teach their children, they're interfering with the karma of children. Should we say, no, we should not interfere with the children's karma, let them be what they will be? We cannot do that. When teachers teach students, when doctors treat their parents, can they say, oh, that's your karma, you should die by this, I should not interfere? Cannot be. We come into a circumstance in which we develop responsibility. For example, when we are born into a group of people like family and develop responsibility, when we join a certain institution, organization, a business, a corporation, then we adopt into our life a certain group of responsibility, when we are put into circumstances where we have responsibility and can make a difference. Here, we are involved and we have to interfere. Maybe we'll not interfere with what's happening in Ukraine, but still we can. Some people are helping the Ukraine people by meditation, by prayer, or by contributing something to the Ukrainian people. So in some way, they are peripherally involved. So what then would be some guidelines in karma in daily life? First, we have to be clear about the higher purpose of life as well as the principles involved in this higher purpose. And then we have to remember, let all thoughts, feelings, and actions be benevolent with kindness and goodwill. And then let us perform benevolent acts every day to people by words or by deeds. In other words, it's not just we should not do bad things, but let us take the initiative to do good things on a daily basis to our children, to our members of the family, even by words of thank you, good morning, and those things. Keep on sending out benevolent acts. Then we avoid doing selfish and harmful deeds. Then even our thoughts, let it be objective and impersonal so that we begin to transcend karma and be aware of resentment and anger and work this out so that they will flow and disappear and dissipate in our push-button world. And then practice meditation every day so that we begin to live the higher life rather than just be buried in our lower triangle. All right, we can devote the rest of the minutes for our first part to comments or questions and answers. If you have,
Thank you very much, Vic. Yes, we have 3 questions. There's actually, James began by saying that there are astonishing parallels between the lives and deaths of Kennedy and Lincoln. Could that be attributed to karma?
Well, some people would say that perhaps Kennedy is the reincarnation of Lincoln. There have been so many speculations on this, but the truth is that we don't know. There are parallels. No time to go into it, but it's very remarkable. I've looked into it myself regarding the secretary of Kennedy, the vice president who replaced him, the person who assassinated Lincoln and Kennedy. But you can look into that. You Google that and you'll find that it's remarkable indeed.
That's very clear on the internet if anyone is interested to Google that. Magda asks regarding karma, what is the scope and impact of our free will? The non-dual Eastern traditions often claim there is no free will, although I find this actually in contrast with their own ideas of classifications of karma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This is a big topic, a profound topic that we can only touch upon briefly, but it is a deep topic. First, I'll just say a few things briefly, and maybe that can be another topic at another time. First, oftentimes people have different concept of what is called free will. Free will involves cause and effect. We cannot have free will without cause and effect, without what is called determinism. For example, is free will something which is spontaneous and uncaused? It can't be. An uncaused action is not free will. An uncaused action is just a happenstance. It is a chance occurrence. And chance occurrence cannot be an exercise of free will. When we speak about freedom of the will, what will is this that is supposed to be free? For example, if you hypnotize me and I do what you do, you would say, okay, I act without free will. So when is it that I should act with free will? If I am influenced by society and then I do what society tells me, am I acting out of free will? You'd probably say no. I became a criminal because I was influenced by people in society, and so I did not act out of free will. So what then is free will? Free will only will become meaningful if there's a will, something inside, that has a certain ultimate preference in life. In other words, suppose I want to be happy. Suppose this entity wants to be happy. Is that the final goal and preference of that entity? Then the question is this person able to do things to achieve that one and no impediment towards it? Then that's the meaning. That's the meaning of what is called a free will. But if there is no such preference, no such principle inside, then the word free will has no meaning. I'm just putting it in a brief capsule. I know that some of you may not be able to ride this discussion for now because it needs more extensive clarification of what I mean. But please look into that. Maybe at another time we will discuss about that subject.
The whole subject of free will is far more complicated. This is from Karthik Ramadas. Is entire conditioning of individuals due to karma? And with awareness, can one always change it?
In general, conditionings are due to karma. I suppose that, I don't know, 100% of it. Conditionings are due to karma. It may be karma in past life, it may be karma in this life, but these conditionings are due to karmic influences of the environment and the past. Now, awareness, a higher level of awareness, is not part of conditioning. Awareness just notices that, all right, I'm inclined to do certain things, this thing, I'm inclined to eat this kind of food, and yet it seems that it's not right for me to eat this. Now, this type of thinking is no longer part of conditioning, but rather an insight of realization from the impersonal level. For example, sugar is going to harm my body. And there's a principle that I realized that I should try to live as healthily as possible so that I won't suffer. That one is just a simple principle. And if that higher insight about staying healthy is seen, then it is now in conflict with the tendency of the lower part, which is conditioned. And now this awareness, whether it will prevail or not, will depend upon the clarity and the strength of this awareness. And this is our struggle throughout our lives, all of us. We are subject to this. And it may take many lives before we triumph over our lower level, but eventually we should, and I think we will.
Thank you, Vic. We still have 2 questions on the chat and one with a raised hand icon, but it's going on for 5 past, and I really do have to stop for the 10-minute break. So I'm afraid that we'll have to stop for the moment, or I'm going to go too far out of time, and that will have karmic repercussions as well. So please be patient, and we will come back to your questions before we begin the next part of the session. Now we'll go for our 10-minute break, if that's okay with you, Vic. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Welcome back, Vic. Welcome back, everybody. I'll go straight to the next question and try to do these quickly. From Alfred, he asks, what about social activists? Is it their chosen dharma for action towards injustice? I can't hear you.
Yes, evidently it is their dharma. You notice that some of us are bothered by environment. Some of us are bothered by political injustice. Some of us are bothered by many other things, different things. Why is it that you have chosen those things? Is because somehow we are inclined towards that, and karma has brought up to an awareness of those issues that are very important to us, and hence it's part of their dharma.
Okay, thank you. Now this is lovely, because Natalia asks, can there be a cause in the future and an effect in the present? And in the chat, Shiva Subramanian answered, Natalia, this is a profound question in the context of non-linear time in the celestial realms, and in the context of God being beyond past, present, and future, timeless and beyond comprehension. So before
Yes.
I pass the word to his actual question, would you like to comment on that, please, Vic?
Okay. Well, I am in agreement with Siva Subramanian's comment about this question of Natalia. From a linear point of view, in other words, time is linear. Now, then later, then the next moment, and so on. If I do something now, the effect will happen a few moments later. So it is linear. However, mystical as well as philosophical insights or speculation has introduced us to the possibility and even probability of timelessness. The philosopher Immanuel Kant says that the time and space are added by our consciousness. In other words, in the real world, there is no such thing as time and space. We add it in order to understand things, and then we put things in their sequences. So in their actuality, everything happens outside of time or in the same moment. In the linear area, let me just address it in the usual linear area. What we speak of as the future influencing the present time is still the present influencing the present moment. For example, suppose somebody has precognitively perceived an event tomorrow. And you may think that it's the precognition of tomorrow's event that will influence my action today. In a way, yes, but actually the cause is my perception of that perceived or precognized event. That is the cause. And it just so happens that I'm not only able to look into the past or the present, but also the future. And so, but it's still my decision to influence what I'm going to do now in view of what I perceive, even if it is the future. When we now go beyond time, then it's a very different thing already. And this discussion, our discussion right now, will no longer be relevant. There comes a point now when all these things about cause and effect, about the meaning of life, about the purpose of life, all this would no longer be meaningful. And that's an entirely different field of discussion altogether.
Okay, thank you. Shiva Subramanian, can I ask you please to voice the question?
Yes, thank you. My question is about interfering in other people's karma, and in a sense, Alfred Long has already mentioned that question in very in a succinct manner. You mentioned that you can interfere in another person's karma as long as it's part of your dharma, but what about a larger scale interference in another person's or a people's karma as participation in theosophical society and putting forth, taking part in programs in a big way when you're not the president of the society or even a member of a society? What about somebody interfering in the affairs of another country, another culture? So what about those kind of positive karma?
Okay, thank you. I think we've understood the question. Vic?
Yeah. Since time immemorial, since the ancient times, people have been interfering with the karmic events of different nations. That's why there are wars, there are invasions, there are conquests, there are political interventions, there are, like what is happening in Ukraine today. So again, it is felt as our duty. For example, a country may feel that it's their duty to protect a friend country, and they take it upon themselves as dharma. In the Second World War, when Germany threatened to invade Poland, then France and Britain declared that if you invade, then we will declare war on you. So they have adopted as their dharma the protection of Poland and to counter what Hitler was doing. So these things are very common. Should we do so? Again, it's now a question of whether what is proper and improper. There are things which are proper in the sense of it is our duty, for example, to try to protect our environment worldwide, and so we would interfere with the actions taken by some countries. This is what Greenpeace is doing throughout the world, so that even if it is not in their country, they would try to interfere and try to lessen or minimize the harmful things that people in many countries do. There are other things, on the other hand, that may be left better to themselves. There are certain things which, when we use our judgment, we may say, all right, this one, we need not interfere. It may be a cultural thing. It may be something like the cultural habits of a country may be so, but since it does not involve injustice, then no need to interfere. That's the way of life, and leave it like that.
Okay, thank you, Vic. I think we'll have to leave it there because we're running very short on time. The last question for the moment, Sheila raised her hand, so I'll just ask her to unmute, but I will have to ask you to be very, very quick. Can you unmute yourself, Sheila? Yes.
What is the relationship of soulmate and karma?
Yeah. What is called soulmate is usually popularly understood as if a soul has a permanent mate life after life. In other words, you only have one soulmate till eternity. I don't think that this is true. What is called soulmate? Like classmate. You don't just have one classmate, you have many classmates, and therefore when you graduate, you meet one classmate here and you feel very good with them, another classmate in another circumstance and you feel very good with them, and so on. So we have a lot of soulmates in the sense that we have lived with them closely before, and when we meet them in this life, we feel very close to one another. But it doesn't mean that that is the soul, the only mate that we will have throughout eternity. And these are all due to karma. In other words, our linkages with these people, the souls in previous lives, create the karmic circumstance that bring us together in this life. Usually, the people whom we marry usually have been soulmates in some way, even if it is not fully positive soulmates, but some positive, maybe some negative. There are those who are very good friends, best friends, and not necessarily married people, because in previous lives they have lived together and have worked together, and then in this life they just are drawn to each other. So these are soulmates, and there can be many soulmates.
Thank you, Vic. At that point, I'll have to draw the question and answer session to a close to allow you to move on with the second part of today's session, please, on karma.
Yes. We have talked about reincarnation, our nature, reincarnation, then karma. And we said that in reincarnation, we grow from life to life. We learn the lessons, and we learn the lessons through karma. Whenever we have pain, we have talents, these are due to karma, and then we grow life after life. Sometimes we slide back, but eventually we move on. Now, if we keep on doing this for lives and lives, what happens in the end? Is it endless, or is it something that has an end? And when we have lived already for hundreds of lives and we have learned the lessons of human life, what happens? Do we graduate just like in school? We don't just keep on going back to high school. So one day we will have to graduate. And this brings us to the concept that there are people who have graduated from this school of life, and they have perfected their lessons as human beings, and now they will now be considered as having attained human perfection. So we now go into this question about let me share my screen now. We now go into this question about the existence of perfected people. The existence of perfected human beings. Now, in this discussion, it is very easy to go into pet beliefs. I may want to believe in these things, or I may be super skeptical about these things. And so I would like to approach this from an evidential point of view. It will not constitute proofs, but cumulatively, it may bring us to the view that with a high probability, there are such people as perfect human beings. We mentioned that we have observed from experience. We have observed from experience that some people seem more mature and advanced than others, even if they grew up in the same family and environment. And then some are so advanced or precocious that they are regarded as divine beings, gods, or a god. Examples are Hermes, Dionysius, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, and the adepts. Are they just myths or religious beliefs, or are there factual basis for their existence? Now, let me start with psychology. We have partly discussed this before, but this is relevant now. The beginnings of the psychology, it was about the sickness, the psychological sickness of people. But in the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century, a new branch of psychology emerged, first called humanistic psychology, and later transpersonal psychology, about the higher reaches of human beings. In other words, from a psychological research point of view, are people going towards a certain direction of growth? And many psychologists think so. The most famous is Abraham Maslow, who posited that one of our highest goals in life, which is hardwired in us, meaning it is internally, it is innate in us, is to go towards self-actualization and self-transcendence. He did not talk about reincarnation. He just says that all of us have this tendency. Whether we actually attain it in life or not is another issue, but he finds that all people tend towards these things. Carl Jung talks about this state of maturity called individuation, and Carl Rogers calls such a person a fully functioning person, and Asagioli calls it the synthesis of all our psychological and spiritual factors. Let me go through this briefly. Maslow, as many of you know, talked about the hierarchy of human needs, that there are 5 basic needs that are inherent in all of us. 4 of these needs are what are called deficiency needs, that if we don't meet them, we have pathological consequence of such deficiency. So whenever we have physiological needs, security needs, need to belong, and self-esteem needs. When these are problematic, then a person may develop neurosis or imbalance in personality. But after these needs are substantially met, then there is a higher need that all of us will tend towards, and this is called self-actualization. And this is not a deficiency need, but rather the fulfillment of our nature or our being. Later, in 1970, Maslow added one more to these needs. He calls it self-transcendence, meaning even higher than self-actualization. And these levels they correspond to the lower and higher triangle needs that we have. The lower triangle would correspond to the deficiency needs, whereas the being needs are on the higher triangle. So this is the higher need of a human being that will make a person as perfect as possible. Maslow made a study of many people around the world and found that there are certain types of people who seem to have attained to this self-actualization state where they are perhaps considered as the most mature human beings on earth. So he wrote a book, several books actually, but two of them are major. One is The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. In other words, aside from the present level, what are the possible levels that we can reach when we become more and more mature? And he developed also what he calls the psychology of being. It's no longer about a psychology of becoming a sane person with no psychological sickness, but to be able to fulfill the dictates of our nature towards our highest state of being. Now, Maslow outlined the qualities of such mature people. As I mentioned, these are people who are as near perfection as possible. They are not rattled by common problems. They are fulfilled people, effective people, kind people, mission-oriented people. In other words, if you idealize probably a perfect person, this would be the self-actualized people that Maslow has identified. Now, he has identified 14 such qualities, and I'll just quickly go through them. Later in a recording of the video of our session, you might wish to go through them again and then try to analyze in what way they are relevant to our lives. So I'll go through them quickly. The first thing that they identified is that these people have a more correct perception of reality and are comfortable with such a reality. If, for example, they don't have a leg, or if they are blind, they can accept it rather than have a distorted perception of this reality, and they become neurotics because they become cognitively wrong. So they're at home with reality, whatever it is, whether it's death, whether it's deprivation, whether it's an accident. So they are comfortable with reality as it happens. The second is that they accept themselves as they are, not only external reality, but themselves, including their limitations and weaknesses, and they also accept others. They exhibit a high degree of spontaneity. They are more themselves, and they are not bound by external social restrictions. But they don't also just rebel against society just for the purpose of rebellion. They are themselves. They are natural rather than bound by convention. They are not egocentric. This is the lower triangle, the lower self. They are more preoccupied with problems and causes outside of themselves. They are mission-oriented. They enjoy privacy and solitude, and they are not rattled or agitated by events that normally bother others. The lower triangle is the one that is rattled and subject to fear and phobia and anxiety, but a higher triangle that's not, and this is where they can go into privacy and solitude. They are autonomous and not dependent upon the culture and environment for their growth. They depend for their growth on their inner latent potentials. They are not trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're not trying to compare themselves with other people. They look at their potential rather than look at what other people are able to do. And this, by the way, is the principle behind theosophical education. We try to let children develop their own potential and not base their growth on competition or comparison with other people. That's why in Golden Link education and theosophical schools, we don't have rankings, we don't compare them, but each one should be encouraged to reach their highest level of growth. They exhibit a continual freshness of appreciation. They repeatedly experience awe and wonder and pleasure in the everyday world, something which is not based on conditioning, but based on inner insight. Then Maslow says, they have mystic experiences or the oceanic feeling of oneness with all, in which they experience ecstasy, awe, and wonder. They have a deep feeling of compassion for human beings in general. They have a deep interpersonal relationship with others, so that even when they enjoy privacy and solitude, they are not aloof to humanity. They have empathy towards humanity and compassion. They are democratic in their attitude, and they do not discriminate on the basis of class, race, or color. They are highly ethical. They have a clear sense of right and wrong. They have a healthy, non-hostile sense of humor, and they're creative. They have fresh, naive, and direct way of looking at things. Now, some of these concepts tally with the age-old idea about perfect human beings, especially the mystical side of things. Now, Carl Jung speaks about the fragmentation of our ego, our personality, and eventually we develop a self that integrates all of these things, and the person becomes an integrated and a fully mature individual. Then Roberto Assagioli speaks about the integration of the whole consciousness under the integrative power of the higher self, which is a transpersonal level of consciousness. In theosophy, we speak about the awakening of not only the higher mental, but also the Atma and Buddhi, such that eventually these two are integrated together with a higher triangle as dominant over the lower, and the lower is now subservient to the higher. Now, this type of perfection in spiritual tradition has been well known since the ancient times. The Buddhists call this arhat, these people as bodhisattvas, buddhas, arhats. In Islam, it's called al-kamil, al-insan, or the perfect person. In Hinduism, they are the rishis, the jivan muktas, or the mahatmas. In Christianity, they are called saints, people who have walked the way of Christhood, the way of perfection, or the ladder of perfection. In theosophy, they are called adepts or mahatmas. So let's go into examples of historical persons who were not only so spiritually advanced, but also exhibited extraordinary powers over hidden laws of nature. In other words, they're not just morally superior or advanced, but they seem to have attained a level of being that is extraordinary and which is transcendent of ordinary human life, such that they even go beyond things like sorrow, in addition to knowledge about the hidden laws of nature. So I'll give a few examples that there are such people in history. I'd like to take as examples historical people rather than people whose existence may be legendary, mythical, or being doubted. Let me start with Padre Pio, because he just recently died in 1968. Some of us were born before that, so he's still living. So he's a real person. He was born in 1887. Why is Padre Pio very special? In addition to his being an extremely pious and religious and spiritual person, a very good person, he also was a very remarkable individual. He was a Catholic priest and was declared a saint in the year 2002, about 30 or 40 years after his death. Now, he had unusual capacities. He developed what is called stigmata, where there was a wound on his palm, both palms and feet, as well as part of the body. And after it appeared, it never disappeared throughout his life. You will take a look at this photo of his. Usually he would put a bandage here on the palm so that people don't see it. But there are rare times when he doesn't have the bandage, and you will see that his palm is full of blood or dried blood. And I remember having seen a photo that when you look through his palm, there is a hole inside. In other words, as if there was something punctured inside, such that there is a permanent hole. Although, take note, after he died and his body was exhumed, there was no hole. But during his lifetime, there was always blood in his hand, called the stigmata. He had healing powers. One example is this. There was a girl who was born without pupil in the eye. The pupil is the black circle in our eye where we absorb light, and the light goes to the retina and we can see things. But this child had a very rare disease where he had no pupil. So he's blind, and the doctors told him that there was no hope for this. There was no cure for this. Then his aunt or one of her elders tried to pray for her through Padre Pio. And she received a letter from Padre Pio on a certain day, and they decided to go and travel with this child to go and see Padre Pio. On the way, traveling to Padre Pio, this girl, I think she was 4 years old, started to see things. Whereas it's not possible for her to see things because of the nature of her eye. And later when they arrived in Pietrelcino, the place where Padre Pio was, then this lady, this aunt, told Padre Pio, although Padre Pio has not seen this girl, this small girl, she said, that please pray and help this child. And Padre Pio said, you know that he already can see. In other words, he knew that this girl could already see. And apparently he was responsible for the vision of this girl. There are many such stories, and that's why, and it was investigated by Vatican before he was declared a saint. He also appeared in many places, but in the last 50 years of his life, he never left this place. This small town called Pietrelcina in Italy. He has been seen in Switzerland, he has been seen in Brazil, and a lot of people have testified about seeing him in those places when he was actually in a small town in Italy. 40 years after his death, most of his body did not yet deteriorate. 40 years. It was not yet bones. In fact, his heart has not decayed. This heart is now considered a relic, and one time it was brought to the Philippines, to various cities in the Philippines, and on display. And this heart was the physical heart of Padre Pio, but it has not decayed and what became just dust. So there are such people, later I'll talk about them, they're called incorruptibles, which happen to some of these people who seem to have extraordinary advancement in their status as a human being. Now, Therese Neumann is another one. She died in 1962, and she was a very pious, religious, and spiritual person. And at the age, she died at about 64 years old. At the age of 25, she stopped taking any food except to take the Eucharist, what is called the piece of bread that is put on the tongue and just melts. And since the time till she died, she never took any food. And at 28 years old, she stopped taking any water, and she developed stigmata, the same as Padre Pio. And she died at the age of 64. And she had visions, and she became very well known. She was tested by the Vatican. She was tested by many doctors as to the reality of whether she really could survive and not lose weight when she was not eating any food or not drinking any water. Now, it so happens that there is another person with the same claim. Her name is Giribala in India. And these two persons, Therese Neumann and Giribala, were mentioned in the book by a famous yogi called Yogananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda. And we can even mention Yogananda. If some of you have not read this book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, He died in 1952, so he's a modern person. If you have not read his book, try to read it. It is said that Steve Jobs had only one book in his phone, and that ebook is the autobiography of a yogi. He was the founder of an institute called the Self-Realization Fellowship, and he was one of the most influential yogis that popularized yoga and meditation in the West. He influenced people like Steve Jobs, Deepak Chopra, George Harrison, and so on. And he wrote this book, which is very remarkable. I read it a long, long time ago, and I would encourage you to read it, because in here you'll find accounts, personal testimonies, not only about his life, but the lives of other people, which would seem to affirm the existence of such perfect people is still in the modern times, not just in the ancient times. Then let's go back a bit further. The famous Count of Saint Germain, who lived from 1691 to 1784. These dates of birth and death are not sure, but they are the ones popularly adopted because the philosopher Voltaire described the Count as the man who does not die and who appears to know everything. Take note that Voltaire, as a philosopher, was a highly skeptical person, and yet he describes this Count as that. This Count was the advisor, consultant of many kings, and he was commissioned by King Louis XV of France for diplomatic missions. He was a skillful physician, distinguished chemist, musician, jeweler, and so on. And when he attended events, he is not known to eat or take things that are offered during those methods. And then in the esoteric tradition, he is considered as one such perfected human being. Then Apollonius Tiana, we go back further, who lived from the year 3 to 97. He was a Pythagorean, one who preached the teachings of Pythagoras. And he was known as a wonder worker, healer, and somebody who could prophesy. He raised a dead woman. Now, take note, the time that he lived was also the time when Jesus is supposed to have lived. And hence, his story, his life story, has often been confused or mixed up with that of Jesus and the Gospels. And in fact, some people say that the story of the Gospels are based on the life of Apollonius Tiana. He traveled to India, and the last time that he appeared was when he was tried in court, where he was eventually acquitted. But during the court trial, he just vanished in the presence of the people during this trial and appeared elsewhere. Then we have already mentioned about the Mahatmas, Mahatma Kuthumi and Mahatma Maurya. I did not put the year of birth and death because we don't know. Probably still living today. He was a Kashmiri Indian, and he was the personage described in Sennett's The Occult World, who demonstrated many things, many phenomena that shows his mastery over the hidden laws of nature. He had studied in Germany and knew the famous physicist and philosopher Gustav Fechner, and he was the co-author of the Secret Doctrine, and wrote most of the Mahatma letters, which are now published. We still have this today, that form the foundation of modern theosophy. So these are historical people who seem to be samples of those people who show, if not perfection, but near perfection. Now, let me just mention about in the Christian tradition, what are called the incorruptible saints. Not corruption in the political sense, but corruption in the physical sense. Example, Bernadette of Soubirous, who lived in 1844 to 1879, was the one who had visions of Lourdes, and the Lourdes today in France is because of his visions and his instructions where the water, the spring would be found, and this spring is supposed to have healing properties. After she died, she was exhumed 3 times, and the last time was 1925. And after 45 years after her death, the liver was still soft. Earlier, I spoke about Padre Pio, where his heart was still intact. In the case of Bernadette, it is the liver. And parts of her body were still not disintegrating. The same thing with Teresa of Avila. There are parts of her body after 400 years are still intact. Then Catherine of Siena, then Francis Xavier, and so on. So some of these things are not well known, but they are factual. And then we begin to see that, is there another world that we don't understand, but which are suggestive of the existence of these people? So there are some who are sometimes considered as mythical, legendary, who have shown a level of maturity, wisdom, and perfection that we sometimes can't believe that such people existed. Now, let me close with a historian who published a book called The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history, 100 people. And out of the 100, I'd like to share with you what he considered as the 10 most influential persons in history. And who are these 10 persons? It starts with Muhammad, Isaac Newton, Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, St. Paul, Chai Lun, the inventor of paper, Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press, Columbus, and then Einstein. These are the top 10 people who made the biggest difference and influence in human civilization. Now you will notice that 5 of these 10 are people who were in the category of perfection or near perfection, and that they influenced world civilization more than other people. In this list, only 2 are scientists, Isaac Newton and Einstein. 2 are inventors, Gutenberg and Chai Lun, and 1 was an explorer. But the 5 of them are spiritual people, spiritual teachers, whose lives have demonstrated a different kind of level, and they are the most influential in history. So we find that this level of perfection is because they have developed the higher faculties or levels of consciousness, from the transpersonal to the spiritual, and they have control over the lower levels of their consciousness. After multiple lives, some have learned the key lessons in life, and we, all of us here, will one day reach this state, and some have already attained it. And those who attained it are no longer incurring personal karma. They've exhausted their past personal karmas or seeds of karma. There are no more unconscious impulses for physical birth, and so they don't get reincarnated anymore. They don't, unless they wanted to for certain purpose, and they become one of the adepts, one of the people in the adept hierarchy, or what is called the communion of saints in Christianity, and then they move on to the next stage of human evolution. All right, let me now pause here for your comments or questions.
Okay, well, thank you once again for what I would call a masterclass in karma of the ancient wisdom, I would say, more than a simple introduction. I'm sure it's answered more questions. Okay, let me go to Sheila. I think I did not lower your hand. If you wish to raise it again, let me know. Magda, I would ask you to unmute, please, if you can.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Actually, I have a question relating to the previous session. The problem I have with the reincarnation is that most of the people, they incarnate, as you said, every 1,000 or 1,500 years, which is huge for us in our linear terms. Even if you were explaining the 7 root races of the humanity, but still, you know, when I see how less we evolve in one lifetime, and how barbaric. I mean, there is a lot of sorrow amongst humanity and human beings, and a lot of hurt. So I really wonder, this is such a slow process of incarnation, reincarnation, because when I read about incarnation, it was often they say you can incarnate every 70, 80 years, or 500, 400, but 1,000 to 1,000, of
Magda,
course.
excuse me, what is your question specifically? Because we have very short.
Yeah, to learn that much and to go through an evolution to a perfected human being, and it's a very slow process. Even if you consider the 7 root races that is believed by the theosophists.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I actually asked the same questions as you, Magda. Apparently, there is a purpose also in the growth process during the interim period, not just in the physical period, such that in the devachanic state, there are certain things which are further, like a continuation of the immediate past life, so that this 1,000 or 1,500 years is not just waiting period, like sleeping period, but also a developmental period. And there are those apparently who are able to reincarnate for a shorter period. So who are those who have 500, 1,100, 1,500 years? I don't know, except that we are told that the more advanced a person is, the longer is the interim period. And the exceptions would be those who meet premature death, and so they reincarnate quickly.
Thank you, Vic. I'll go to Sheila, who did actually have another question. If you could unmute, please, Sheila.
Yes, are there also heroes who you consider as who have reached perfection?
When you say heroes, you're referring to
Like
military heroes?
Aquino, yeah, like
Okay.
Jose Rizal.
Martyrs.
Yeah,
Martyrs.
martyrs.
Yeah. Well, if you, I'll answer you from a personal point of view, because there's very little writing about such speculation whether they are perfect or not. That they are highly mature people like Jose Rizal, I would fully agree. But whether they are near perfection, I don't know, because in this state near perfection, it requires a very high spiritual state. Mahatma Kotumi says that a person may be a Bacon or Aristotle in the intellect, but unless they are awake in their spirituality, then they are not even noticed by the adepts. So a requirement of this is the awakening of our spiritual nature, our spiritual impulse. And so a person may be a martyr in a country, they may be very selfless, but unless such martyrdom or heroism is due to a higher impulse rather than a lower impulse, then they would not be near perfect or perfect.
Thank you. I'll go back to the chat for a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. There is a question from Natalia. Can the Nirmanakaya have karma?
Well, I can only share with you my thoughts. First, let me explain what a Nirmanakaya is, because maybe most people may not know what it is. They are people who die, they're advanced people who die, who maintain their lower bodies such that they can easily interact with the outer, the physical world, or they may even reincarnate quickly. In other words, they don't go through the normal process where they will drop their lower bodies and then you will have to wait through Devachan and then get born. In the case of Nirmanakaya, in order to save effort and time, they retain their highly developed lower bodies. So do they develop karma? If they're perfected people, then they are free from personal karma. But if they became Nirmanakayas, even though they may not be fully perfect yet, then they would still have personal karma. Who they are, what are examples? This one I cannot answer. I don't know.
Thank you. I'll go to KVB Sastri. If you can unmute. Thank you.
Namaste. Are you able to hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, reincarnation takes place, you are telling me. For reincarnation, there are so many solar systems in the universe. In which solar system it may take place, that we get out. How to find exactly know where the reincarnation takes place? In the universe, you know very well. Sir, so many galaxies are there, and in each galaxy, so many solar systems are there.
So your question is?
Pardon, sir?
What is your question now, Brother
My
Shen?
question is, reincarnation takes place in our solar system only,
Okay.
or beyond our solar system?
For those among us who have studied the secret doctrine, there is a partial answer to this question, but which is beyond our present discussion.
Okay.
Normal reincarnation is happening only here on this earth. In other words, we, humanity, we only reincarnate here on this earth. There are globes. In other words, the earth globe would have 6 other subglobes, wherein which we will live through those particular globes. But this would be far beyond in the future, that it is not very relevant to us right now. And whether we are going to live through the cycles of existence in those other globes, whether physical or non-physical, is something in the future. So the secret doctrine says that that is possible, in fact, that is coming. But for now, what is relevant to us now is that we are all reincarnating here on this earth, the physical earth, and not in other planets or other solar systems.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to the chat. Thank you for the question. Shiva Subramanian asks, does past karma place people in a certain degree of proximity in such a way that each one has an opportunity to balance their karma in a complex matrix? And are karmic debts repaid to different souls rather than to the souls to whom the debts are due?
Okay. Are karmic debts repaid to different souls rather than the souls to whom the debts are due? Okay. Let me first go to the first question. Does past karma place people in a certain degree of proximity in such a way that each one has an opportunity? I believe so. We are born into our family, our parents, our siblings, in a certain place, whether it's in Philippines or India or in Alaska, for the purpose of having this opportunity to work out relationship issues with one another. We are drawn together either by love or by hatred, by kinship. So this one will have to work out life after life until it reaches a state of non-attachment, and then it goes to equilibrium. Are the karmic debts repaid to different souls rather than to the souls to whom the debts are due? My understanding is that we don't. If, let us say, I owe $10 to Juliet, and I pay $10 to another person, I'm benefiting the other person, but I'm not repaying back my debt to Juliet. It is said that when karma has been caused, it started, then it will have to follow through until its very end and cannot be changed. So we'll have to do it until it brings about an equilibrium, which means that the equilibrium will come upon the harmonization of 2 people. What I do to other people creates new karma, but it may not resolve the karma with another person.
Okay, I've got
That's my understanding.
Final two questions, one from the chat, which is from Karthik Ramadas. Can a perfect being, an enlightened being, finish or remove the karma of someone else?
You'll find in the literature of certain religions that they are able to do this. In Christianity, for example, the atonement of sins is an example. Not only does a priest will forgiving, those who confess, but also the death of Christ would atone for the sins of humanity. Theosophy, the ageless wisdom, says that this is not possible. In other words, karma has to follow throughout. If I do something good, I create a new karma and may mix up with the past karma, producing new destiny, but the past karma will still go on through. It cannot be erased. Madame Blavatsky has written somewhere that not even gods can erase the past karma of a person's action. So the answer from the theosophical point of view is that no, higher beings cannot erase the karma, their own or other people's.
Okay, well, I'm not taking any further questions because we have gone beyond our time. So you're going to have to keep them and ponder upon the questions. Thank you all for being with us today. As always, our question and answer session would require a 2-hour session on its own, which is always a brilliant idea. Vic, thank you for literally the master classes that you are giving us in your introduction to the ageless wisdom, and for the wisdom that you show and share so willingly with all of us in answering the questions that are posed to you. So I will see you on Friday. See everybody else on Friday, nice and bright and early on time. Stay safe, enjoy, read up some of those books that Vic has mentioned today, or on the internet if you're interested, because that always helps in our own studies. And we shall see you all then. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.